Thank you. Madam President, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you this evening. Before I begin, Laurie Ann asked that I share with you some of my credentials. So my name is Peter White, and I'm a 14-year Bexley resident living on North Cassingham. I'm a tenured professor at Ohio State and senior director of the Institute for Genomic Medicine at Nationwide Children's, although I'm not here representing either of those organizations. But as a scientist, I have 30 years of experience in the statistical analysis and interpretation of highly complex data sets. I lead a group of 50 data scientists, mathematicians, and developers that's funded by the National Institutes of Health and recognized internationally for our work. While my research focuses on understanding the genetics of pediatric cancer and rare disease, I want to assure you that the data analysis that I'll share with you tonight was done with the same standards and integrity as is expected for any scientist in my field. So it's considering that background and expertise that BRAIR invited me to help them perform an analysis of Bexley Police Department's traffic citation data. Now, if you're not familiar with BRAIR, we're a Black-led community group that's committed to leading the community of Bexley in identifying and dismantling the systems of institutional racism in our city. Results of the study are in this packet. I think most people have a copy in the audience, and you should each have a copy. I know you guys have an incredibly busy agenda. There's 50 slides in this deck. I'm only going to talk about the first 20. The remaining are an appendix that has additional information. So I'll call out page numbers as I go through this, and I'm going to go very fast. So just flip along with me as I call out the page numbers. But as we go through it, I just want to ask you to think of one question. As you look at this data, keep in mind, how well are we loving our neighbor? So let's start on page 2. This is the equity goal of the Bexley Police Department. It was published in last year's community policing report that all citizens should be treated with fairness, and fairness demands that no individual demographic be disproportionately impacted by policing. So what BRAIR set out to do was to test whether our police department is meeting this goal. So we conducted a traffic citation study by looking at from a public records request of 6 months of citation data collected from November through April of this year. Collecting the data took 6 months, analyzing it took 6 months. And so I'll start with going through it on page 4. So the first hypothesis we wanted to test was if policing practices are fair, then no individual demographic should be disproportionately impacted by policing. And what you can see on slide 5 was some data that we published last year that showed when compared to our neighbors, Bexley has the highest racial disparity index. And what I mean by a racial disparity index is if you look at the red piece of the pie, that represents our minority demographic within Bexley. The piece on the right, the red piece, 61%, represents the total number of citizens that were stopped belonging to a minority group. So that disparity index is 4.5 times, which is the largest of any of the suburbs. So if you look at page 6, the mayor published last year in the community policing report a 3-mile ring demographic around Bexley. So one of the challenges is, what is our driving population in Bexley? So the hypothesis was that the citizens are coming from within that 3-mile ring. And as you can see, that 3-mile ring closely matches the population of citizens that were stopped. However, as a scientist, I know that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. So what we set out to do was to actually look at the addresses of individuals that were stopped and use Google geocoding technology to map their home addresses so we could see where they were coming from. So what we found is on page 7, this is showing that 3-mile ring. Only 40% of citizens live within 3 miles of Bexley. And if you turn over to page 8, we found that the majority of citizens, 60%, live outside of that 3-mile ring. The other thing you'll notice on that figure on page 8 is the preponderance of red dots. A red dot represents the address of a Black citizen that was stopped. 69% of citations that we received were issued to Black citizens. So this is 3 times higher than would be expected for the population of Franklin County, or 10 times higher than would be expected within Bexley. The other, on page 9, I'm showing that the racial disparity index has actually increased over this year. So this is showing that 69% figure. And then on page 10, this was just some data to make you aware of. What we noticed is when looking at data from the last 5 years, the use of race unknown has increased tenfold. So one of the issues in being able to assess whether the police department is being fair in its policing, we need to know the race of individuals that are being cited. And as you can see, something happened around 2017 to 2018 that led to that percentage jumping from around 2% to close to 20% race unknown. The second fairness test we performed was to see if citation activity correlated with accident statistics. I think one of the things that we've heard the mayor say is that our police department is acting to protect the safety of our citizens. So one thing you would expect to see is there would be a correlation there between when accidents happen and when citations occur. Slide 12 shows you a heat map. At the top heat map there is data from just over 1,200 accident reports that were filed from January 2016 through September 2021 here in Bexley. And what you see is most accidents happen between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. The bottom heat map shows you the citation activity of the police department. What we observed was that most citations happen between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., the time when accidents are least likely to happen.
Peter, excuse me, you're at your 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm halfway.
Council, may I ask you to allow just a second, Mr. White, to have another 5 minutes? Does anybody object to that? Please continue.
Thank you. So on page 13, you can see when we look at that data in terms of the distribution between Black and white citizens, we see that Black citizens are disproportionately cited at night. So page 14 was our third test. Citation locations should be congruent with accident data, and citation activity really should target dangerous driving activities. I don't have time, these slides are in the appendix. I don't have time to go through the actual map data that we produced, but we do see that the stops are incongruent with accident data. On page 15, I show you that 71% of citations occurred with little to no risk of public safety. And as you look through the citations that are awarded, it's really quite sad to see how many are being given for very minor offenses, such as tag not displayed correctly, headlights on full, a bulb missing from the rear number plate. What you'll see also on slide 15 is that in terms of accidents, the majority of accidents actually seem to be being caused by white citizens compared to Black citizens, but 71% of the citations are going to Black citizens with little or no risk to public safety. So fairness test 4 was policing activity should be the same regardless of socioeconomic status. Now, measuring socioeconomic status is difficult, so we use the age of the individual's cars. And what you can see on slide 15 is that Bexley Police Department's predominantly citing drivers of older cars. If you're driving a car that's 10 years or older, you're twice as likely to be cited. On page 18, of the $17,000 that was collected in fines in just 6 months, 95% of this came from non-Bexley residents, the majority of whom were Black. Fairness test 5 on page 19. So back to that question I asked at the beginning, does Bexley love our neighbors, our residents and non-residents treated equally? What this map shows, it's that map that I showed you earlier, but zoomed in on Bexley. We see that 93% of citations on page 20 are issued to our neighbors. 7% of citations were issued to Bexley residents. So clearly you're 15 times more likely to receive a citation if you live outside of Bexley. The other thing that you'll notice about this map is the red box there. Those that live within Bexley that are receiving citations appear to be living in areas that are maybe more affordable areas of Bexley to live. So there appears to be a disparity here even within our city. And the question I would ask you that I thought when I saw this map, really not out of 13,000 residents, No one committed a driving offence that was worthy of a citation. Page 21 shows you the conclusions, or our conclusions from this are that the Bexley Police Department does not appear to be attaining its department's equity goal. Black citizens, citizens of lower socioeconomic status, and Bexley non-residents are disproportionately impacted by current police practices. And then finally, coming back to that question of how is the city of Bexley loving our neighbours? There's a lot of data that I've shown you. And as you reflect on that question, just reflect on that question of, does Bexley love its neighbour? In his final address, I've been to the mountaintop speech given the night before he was killed. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. addressed this question of being a good neighbor. When Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, he described a man traveling on the Jericho road who was attacked by robbers and left for dead. A priest and the Levites see him in trouble. They cross the road and they walk on by. But a Samaritan man disregarded the risk to himself and stopped to help the man. What connects this story to the story that I've told tonight is that of our Black neighbors traveling through Bexley. It's their Jericho road. We've heard from our Black neighbors that rather than protected and served by the Bexley Police Department, they feel harassed and bullied. Many of our Black neighbors say they would rather travel around Bexley than take the risk of traveling through Bexley. These claims have been dismissed as hearsay, but I believe the data that we've shown you tonight supports those claims. So just as Dr. King asked people to stop and help the Memphis sanitation workers, I'm here tonight to ask you, will you choose to stop and help our neighbors? By enacting what we call the Good Neighbor Ordinances, you'll be both helping our neighbors and ensuring that our police department is attaining their equity goals. The majority of issues around racial bias and citations that I've shared tonight will go away simply through enacting ordinances that prohibit citations for minor misdemeanors, limit the use of plate scanning and investigatory stops, and stop arresting citizens for minor misdemeanor warrants that are issued outside of the city of Bexley. And to take that one step further, what if stops for equipment failures were labeled as courtesy stops and our officers were provided with an option to cover the cost of the repair? Bexley could become known as a city that loves its neighbor and a leader for restoring the strained relationship between the police and the Black community. That's a Bexley I think we would all be proud to call home. So finally, the appendix data contains specific details of the ordinances that you as City Council have the power to enact that could address this issue. And then there's additional data in there. Thank you so much for letting me speak longer.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. I know you're very passionate about this. I appreciate it. I know that the mayor has some comments regarding this, and I have asked him to please give those during his administrative update. Is there anyone else that's with us tonight that has something to say for public comment?
Okay, I think everybody in here knows who I am. I'm Korkeya. I just got a little comment. Not gonna waste much of your time. I kind of feel like that's what we're doing right now. What is institutional and systemic racism? Institutional and systemic racism is about power. It's not about your likes and your dislikes of Black people. It's about power. And generally, the way this works, that if we as Black people think that it's a problem, and y'all as white people don't think that it's a problem, then guess what? It's not a problem. Because you have the power. Now, everybody in here can look around this room and see that I'm the only Black person in this room. And we've been begging and pleading with y'all to stop discriminatory policing. It's not something that we don't know, that y'all don't know, that the community does not know exists. I've had white people to literally tell me that when they come home and they see a car pulled over, that they take bets on whether or not the person in the car is Black. In the summer of 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, the Franklin County Board of Health declared racism a public health crisis. In the middle of a pandemic, we found that racism was affecting the lives of Black people more than COVID. And what they found is that the health of Black people was already poor as a result of institutional and systemic racism, the systems and the institutions that your parents and your grandparents built and you maintain today. So what does that mean? It means that the emotional, mental, and physical health of Black people is affected on a daily basis as a result of these systems that white people have built. Not my words, well, those are my words. Franklin County Board of Health declared racism a public health crisis, which also means that if we woke up tomorrow morning and these systems were dismantled, and the white people that control these systems were no longer here, we would wake up healthier human beings. Our emotional, mental, and physical health would start to improve immediately because the people that are controlling the systems that affect our health and our well-being will no longer be here. That's what that means. Now, many of you think that racism is something that you need to empathize with Black people on. That's what a lot of white people think. And I'm sure that's what many of you here think. But that's not what we need. Racism is something that you need to cure yourselves of. Because you literally make us sick. Our emotional and well-being is affected on a daily basis.
Sir,
If I'm lucky, excuse me, if I'm lucky, I'll live to be 68 years old.
You're at your 5 minutes. I can ask counsel, would you be willing to allow Mr. Korkeya?
I've just got 5 seconds.
Okay.
If I'm lucky, I'll live to be 68.5 years old. That's 5 years less than a white man my age. Racism takes that many years off of our lives. This is something that is urgent. This is something that should require your immediate attention because it's killing people.